Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is episode 299. And today's topic is we're going to be talking all about the MedX chest press. I recently did a podcast with Luke Carlson at Discover Strength where we just talked about the MedX leg press. And it occurred to us that we should just do podcasts on all of the great pieces, at least all the great pieces that I own for my benefit. But no, for everyone's benefit, it's just really important that we're able to better understand how to utilize these great pieces of exercise equipment with clients. And today's guest to help me do that is Craig Hubert. Craig is a kinesiotherapist, exercise coach, and PN1 nutrition coach, and is the owner of Altered, a boutique exercise studio that offers client-centered coaching using evidence-based principles in both exercise and nutrition. In the industry since 97, Craig's views on exercise and nutrition have been influenced by the likes of Charles Poliquin, Charles Staley, Paul Chek, Jerry Teller, is that Teller? Telly? How do you say that?
Telly.
Pavel Satsulin, Dan John, Dr. John Berardi, and Dr. Eric Serrano, and in more recent years has been heavily influenced by the writings of Arthur Jones, Mike Mensa, Stuart McRobert, and both John Little and Dr. Doug McGuff, whose book Body by Science was the catalyst that prompted Craig to change his entire approach to exercise almost overnight. Craig, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. How are you?
I'm very good. It's great to have you back on. Obviously, you featured before. If anyone's interested in a really good podcast on how to start and grow a high-intensity training business without a studio. So we talked about training people in their homes, training people outdoors, that kind of thing, which, I don't know, actually might not be great timing for that with the restrictions, as virtual is obviously the go-to. But I think as restrictions lessen, those avenues will open back up again. It's certainly a great avenue if you don't have necessarily the capital for a studio in the beginning. So, Craig, to give people just a quick view of your business, as I said to you, I want to get a good start doing business profiles. Everyone comes on the show. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about your business, the session length, the philosophy, your offerings, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. So pretty similar, I think, to a lot of the other guests you've had, a lot of the other business owners. So basically, we have the option of 1 to 2 sessions per week. Session length is 30 minutes in total, and that's sort of with the kind of 5-minute, how are you doing, just kind of following up on their past week. And then roughly it's about 20 minutes of actual training once we get started. But usually from walk-in to walk-out, it's 30 minutes. The occasional 3-session per week if I add in a high-intensity interval-style workout for about 20 minutes. But that's an add-on. It's not really what I feature in terms of packaging. I just transitioned out, slowly transitioning out of a partnership with two other trainers that are a little bit more high volume. They take more of a, I guess I'd call it a common athletic conditioning approach. And over the last 2 years, what I realized was that we're not congruent in terms of our messaging. So case in point, I don't do any kind of Olympic or ballistic lifting in the studio. And I would be explaining that to some of my clients, especially the younger ones that might play sport. And they would look over their shoulder and see, power cleans, hang cleans, a lot of box jumps and stuff like that. And it's not to say that I'm right or wrong with my view. But that's, my view is what it is. And if I'm promoting a business, I don't think it's really a great idea to have somebody doing the exact opposite of what I'm opposing. So that said, currently we are open from 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, Saturday mornings from 8 a.m. till noon. I say we, but it's really just me. I won't be looking for other trainers until the new year. I have a set number of sessions that I'm trying to build myself back up to, which is 60. Once I reach 60, then I'll start bringing in other trainers. But I'm going to take the Discover Strength approach with a nice long and lengthy interview process before I bring anybody in, as I've made the mistake in the past of just kind of taking the first person that comes through the door that I get along with. So.
Yeah, and Luke was kind enough to share the hiring process of in Hit Business membership. You're aware of that?
Yes, yeah, I am actually, and I'll just just do a quick plug for the Hit Business membership for anybody that's not a member that does own a business. I highly recommend it, just because it's a great resource, and even if you're not going on there on a regular basis, there's so much information in terms of the private podcasts that you've done in interviews. The traction series that you did with Luke, I think, is gold, and that actually was a huge reason for my shift in what I'm doing as of today in terms of changing the business name and turning into the structure. So I think that alone is worth a membership.
Thank you, Craig. I'll send you $1,000 via PayPal later on today.
Thank you. I'll be waiting for it.
No, I appreciate that unprompted. I wasn't actually looking for a testimonial then, but I appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you're, I guess, aware of that process, because Luke and his team have been so generous, and in the membership we have every aspect of hiring, from obviously recruiting trainers to so actually recruiting and advertising for trainers, to internships, to the full hiring process from start to finish, and then also trainer retention. So it'd be very useful. Yeah. Awesome. So sorry, we're going to say something, or do you want to get straight into it?
I was just going to add in, just in terms of the business. So as I'm one-on-one only, and we will be offering, once the COVID restrictions lift, just couples. So either with a friend or with a spouse. But that'll be it. I won't be doing. We won't be doing any kind of larger groups. And then my centerpiece at the facility is an ARX Omni. And so what I'm slowly doing is actually building up equipment around the Omni, pieces that basically the Omni doesn't do. So I'm currently in the market for a pendulum leg extension, another lumbar machine because I sold mine.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So anyways, I've got a mix of Nautilus Nitro right now, and pendulum to go with the Omni, which I had been running on demo mode for the longest time, and finally took the plunge and took the software, which I was hesitant to do just because of the cost. So anybody that owns an ARX will understand that, but ARX has been fantastic. And it makes a massive difference. And the feedback data for the client, when they can see it real time, comparing their previous results, has been huge. And actually, a lot of my clients that were using it on demo mode are now really appreciating the difference using the full software. So it's been great.
Yeah, that's great. I think you've got some great tools, and thank you for mentioning that. I forgot to ask you about exactly your tools. I think that's really useful and interesting for the listeners to learn about. We're going to be talking about, obviously, the MedX chest press in this podcast, and you've had experience with this tool for years and supervised lots of training sessions on it. So I'm really excited to learn about your take on the best way to use this piece. And for those that don't know, Craig was actually the generous individual who sold us, when I say us, our studio here, Optima Strength in Ireland, who actually sold us all of our equipment. And so that included the Big Five MedX, MedX Lumbar, which, as you heard earlier, he's sad to see leave. And also a hammer strength leg extension, which has just been the perfect way for us to get started. And I'm already hungry for more pieces, but I know that you can get a great workout with just what we have. So that's working well for us. So let's talk about the MedX chest press, Craig. Do you want to kick off with, I don't know, an overview of this piece, and maybe start getting straight into the settings, like how you set someone up on that piece?
Yeah, certainly. So I had different pieces prior to acquiring the MedX. So in the past, I had the Nautilus dual chest, which was the second generation, I think it was second gen, which had the pec fly. It had the end along with the chest press in one unit, which it was cool, but I was not a fan of it. I know some people like the older Nautilus pieces. I'm not necessarily sold on some of them in terms of the biomechanics and in terms of just the way they're set up. But I had that. I had a Kaiser pneumatic prior to that. I had an Atlantis chest press. I've never been a big fan of converging movement arm, which is what the MedX is. And when I got into the MedX, I felt like I was going kind of like from a Lada to a Cadillac. So what I loved about it was the multiple setting points. So in terms of obviously the seat height, which any bench will do, but also the backrest, and then being able to pin the stack to really accommodate different users. So I mean, whether you're, I had clients that were like 4'11". I've had clients that are 6'6". So on that MedX piece, and I was able to perfectly adjust to accommodate both sizes, which on a lot of pieces you can't do. So. Yeah, it's just fantastic. It's smooth. I found the strength curve to be like almost spot on. There's obviously, like any piece, there's always little things that if you could fix it, you would. But I would say it was one of the smoothest pieces I've ever owned. So if you can get your hands on one, definitely.
Yeah, great setup. So let's just dig into the settings a bit here, Craig. Just because I'm really keen to learn more about your take on this. So I guess when you're first setting someone up and you're eyeballing them, which, by the way, I've realized takes a lot of practice. Just that's the best thing, right? Just get loads of practice. Get used to working with loads of people. Offer tons of free workouts if you need to. Just doing that over and over and over again, you start to learn how to just eyeball someone and get the seat and back setting close to being right. Because obviously, if you're trying to really dial in the efficiency of your service, you need to do that fast or have it preset up. It's hard to have it preset up if they're back to back, right? So you need to just adjust it like in 2 seconds. And that's the only way you get better at that is just through practice, I've found personally. So do you want to just talk through when you first have someone, like a new person come in, what do you do with a MedX chest press? How do you get them set up?
Okay, so the first thing I'll do is, because one of the things I noticed with it, just in terms of, and this is just working with a lot of clients, is I'd get some clients that would feel their triceps, that would feel their deltoids, but they wouldn't necessarily be feeling the pecs, right? So, which is just kind of a mind-body, mind-muscle connection that they just didn't seem to have. Either it was poor activation, or they're just not focusing on the right things. So, the first thing I wanted them to do was I would always take a couple of weeks with the client, have them use the machine, and then see what they're feeling over those 2 or 3 weeks, and then make the corrections as they went. So, and the 2 or 3 weeks, by the way, is based on a once-a-week protocol, not if they were coming in, 2 times. But usually I'd get let's just round it to, we'll say 3 sessions before I made any major corrections. So when they would come in, I would just kind of get a general idea of what their height was. So we'll just use the standard 5'8" as an example. And I say standard 5'8" because that's my height. So, the first thing I wanted to get was the seat height. So normally, depending on the person, so I'll actually jump over to that 6'5" or 6'6" client I had who weighed about 280 pounds. He was really thick. So when he set it up, obviously the backrest had to be pushed far back. I don't remember the settings off the top of my head to allow them. And then I would make sure the movement arm was pinned pretty much at its lowest position when he got on. The reason for that was he was so thick that if the movement arm, if I pinned it, let's say at around 3 or 4 pins, right? 3 or 4 holes showing on the rod, he would actually have to kind of squeeze himself through the handles to get to the back, to get onto the seat. So I would make sure in his case that the movement arm was all the way back. So there was no pinning, so the stack was flat. Then what I would do is adjust the seat, because I always wanted, I always preferred that the client's knees were at the edge, right? So where they had flexion in the knee was where I wanted the pad kind of hitting. I know some people like the bench for the feet. I never did it. I preferred the feet dangling. That was always my preference.
Why is that?
Mainly because this was actually going back to my comment about how a lot of the older Nautilus I didn't like. The one thing I did like was I found that, like, with the old Nautilus, I found the frames big for my size. So my feet never touched the ground. But what I liked about it was that I could never use any kind of leverage through my legs to help get into the motion, right? Which I know we talk about form all the time, but eventually, you're going to try to get from point A to point B in whatever manner possible. And you'll start to see clients trying to leverage themselves to try to finish the rep, which I never wanted. And it's easy when you can't put your feet and use your legs to leverage yourself. It's a lot harder to ratchet if your feet aren't on the ground, right? So you can't shift. It's much harder to shift on the seat if you don't have your legs there to assist with, kind of pushing back into the backrest. So I, as much as possible, would try to keep the feet off the ground, which, depending on the height of the client, wasn't always possible. But I wanted the backrest set first. So I knew how far they were going to be seated relative to the seat. So unless they really had to be dangling off the legs off the side, which I think I had one client do the entire time I used the piece, legs are always forward, bent 90, backrest matching to that length, right? So the femur length relative to the seat, backrest there. Then the next thing I would do was bring the movement arm forward to a position where I'm going to turn the computer sideways so you can see me, and then if anybody watches this on YouTube, then they can get an idea. I never really took the elbow beyond the plane of the shoulder. So I kept I took sort of the Bill DeSimone congruent exercise idea. I never went for that full stretch. A host of reasons, but just biomechanically, it's not really necessary. So basically level of the plane of the body on the rear, but never really beyond that. So I'd set the movement arm. Then I would check and make sure where the movement arm was, so the handles relative to the chest. And what I wanted to see, wrist straight, elbows slightly below the level of the wrist. Now that was subjective, depending on the client, depending on their structure, but it's always like a slight decline from wrist to elbow, or going from wrist to elbow. And then from there, once all of that was set, we would mark the positions, and then we would start the exercise. And then queuing up, obviously, rather than pushing through the hands, and this goes for any machine you're using, everybody has a tendency, especially when they begin the motion always seems to be coming from the handle, from the hand, right? So they're gripping and they're pushing off from there. As opposed to any chest movement is really just horizontal abduction, adduction, right? So what I try to have them do is, rather than thinking of bringing the handles together, I want them to actually have their biceps touching, which is not going to occur, but it's the idea that they're actually going to bring their upper arms in towards each other. And I always make a point that the elbow to the hand is dead weight. So that's just, think of that as a mechanical arm as opposed to your actual hand. And it's only moving because your upper arm is drawing in towards the midline of the body. So that's kind of how we would set it up to start.
I love that. Cueing, the bicep touching. I'm definitely stealing that. That was really good. All right. Let me see here. I want to see if there's anything else.
Well, actually, I'll point out too, there's the upper handle position.
Yep.
Which I never liked. I rarely would use it. I never found it comfortable, just because I never liked the way the arms converged at the top. That said, one of the things I would add in, if I put the handles in that position, it would depend sometimes. I've had clients that had kind of wonky shoulders. What we would do is we would drop the seat position. So let's assume for a second that I lined up the horizontal handles to the midline of the chest, right? So kind of the mid-chest level. For some of them that had shoulder problems that I still wanted to have them do a pressing exercise, I would actually drop the elbow inwards, in towards the torso, using the upper handles, and we would drop the seat accordingly so that the hand would almost line up kind of at just above the bottom of the rib cage. So it'd almost be pushing from, right around here, all right? And then the movement arm would come up this way. And just to add a little bit to it, assuming their shoulder was okay, is I would put the yoga block at the end of the handle. So we take a yoga block, put it at the end, so that when they came into the squeeze, they would actually use it as a hard stop. Squeezing in, contracting against the yoga blocks, and then returning back to the bottom position. But I would only do that in the with the vertical handles as opposed to the horizontal handles.
Okay, all right. So you've got the handle coming. Okay, vertical. And is that if someone's got a shoulder issue, or is that regardless?
I would do the hard stop regardless, but I generally only gave the vertical handles in the instance that the client was having some kind of shoulder issue.
So let's just talk about that. Sorry, Craig, go on.
Yep. No, go ahead. No.
So I just want to talk about the shoulder issue. So this seems to be a debatable subject with hand position on this machine. And, I've heard some people say that actually, some people would say vertical grip better for shoulder impingement issues or shoulder injury. And I've heard the opposite. I've heard some people say they prefer horizontal grip for shoulder issues. Now, if I speak from personal experience, I have had a chronic shoulder problem for a while, which I believe was caused by playing basketball and listeners will be sick of me talking about this on the podcast. And I think it's a torn labrum, which is basically healed. And I think the remaining sort of discomfort that I occasionally have is more neurological than it is actually like the injury's healed, if that makes sense. Like the tissue's healed, perhaps. Yeah. I mean, this is all my hypothesis. I mean, I've not had an MRI, I don't know, but I can say it has got significantly better. And obviously time's played a part in that, but I've also been doing the horizontal handle push on the chest press. And don't get me wrong, I can feel the discomfort, but what I've done is I've learned to push through that and to still get to muscle failure despite the added discomfort that I can feel. And I might find there's some acute soreness afterward. It's like a weird sort of sensation in the shoulder, but then the next day there's nothing. And I've actually found it's improved over time, which is really unusual. But I'm wondering if I'm sort of like breaking that circuit of that kind of neural loop that says, oh, you've injured this area, you've got to be careful. And maybe by pushing through it, it's helped that healing process. I don't know. I'm just kind of hypothesizing here. So anyway, my question is what's your logic for, maybe we can talk a little bit about biomechanics here, for working with someone who's got shoulder challenges, maybe going for that vertical grip versus a horizontal grip?
So again, it's going to depend exactly on what the shoulder problem is. I never saw too many clients that were, coming to me because they slipped and fell and the shoulder was injured that way, or because they were playing a sport and the shoulder got banged up. A lot of times it's just years of chronic doing whatever it was they were doing, living life, and maybe reaching into the backseat of the car with their arm and twisting it one way to grab an object that maybe in that joint position was just too heavy, and then they strained it that way. But it wasn't a specific like either impact injury or whatever. So the reason I preferred the vertical grip was because it automatically pulls shouldn't say automatically, but generally speaking, it will pull the upper arm down towards the torso automatically. But if you look, you're no longer going to abduction. And if you look at you can see it here. So we have the acromion, and then you've got the humeral head, which should kind of drop as this pivots up along with the movement of the scapula, right? So you kind of get this coming. If the arm abducts up, I'm already kind of jamming up through, and that humeral head is kind of jamming in the acromion. If I drop it down and do the pressing that way, I don't have that abduction. I don't get that same impingement occurring. So they can still work the pec in a far less compromised position. Is it ideal? No. And it's a workaround to a problem that has to be addressed. So it's never like, I've never thought of it in terms of, oh, just do it this way and you're going to be fine. It's always been sort of, okay, let's do it this way while we figure out what the actual shoulder issue is, right? And then we move it up from there. In terms of, if you look at the MedX handles, both the vertical and the horizontal, even the horizontal is not perfectly straight, right? It's not parallel to the floor. Yeah. So even then, you're not getting clients that are going to grab that handle and automatically go up into abduction with elevation of the scapula, which is the other issue.
Yeah.
So it's not that the vertical handle position is bad, because you can still I can still drop the seat, or I can still change the position to bring the upper arms in towards the torso. I just like that neutral position for that push because I find the tracking is a little bit more natural. Yeah. So that's the way I looked at it.
Yeah, that was a great reasoning behind that. I love that. Yeah, it makes me think, like, even like you say, both vertical, horizontal grip, they don't really put the shoulder in a really precarious position, like you say, because it's not like a traditional bench press, right? So, and then I guess this is the funny thing about shoulders is everyone's kind of humeral, the way the humerus is fixed into the acromion is different, right? And it's going to be like tiny changes between people. So it's really filling out which exercise variation is going to be best for them. And then there's the specificity of the injury on top of that.
Well, exactly. And I think too that, unless you're, let's say Bryce, right, where you're a full blown, you're a physio, where you can kind of make those decisions. Basically Bryce can go and sit there and do a full workup on a client and get a pretty good idea, if not a bang on idea of what the injury is. The rest of us are not going to have that luxury, right? So if somebody's coming to you and they're not coming from a doctor or a physio, and they have range, like I think that's the other thing to watch is that There's a difference between somebody coming in with shoulder discomfort and somebody who's really very limited in their range of motion, because that's going to be a different approach. And maybe at that point, the MedX chest press is not the best option. However, going back to the setup on the machine, because you can adjust the movement arm. So again, like you can't do like on a Nautilus Nitro or like the old second gen that I had. You can't adjust the movement arm, right? You can adjust the position with your feet and pull the I can't remember what you call the plate that brings it forward.
Entry, yeah.
Thank you, the entry. You can use that, but that's not a limiter in terms of the range. Whereas with the MedX, you can pin that movement arm so that maybe you're only moving a few degrees of motion on let's say on the contraction, on the contraction or the extension at least, right? Which is fine. So if that's a pain-free area, maybe that's where you start, and then you can slowly move that pin down, which I've done in the past, and say, okay, so we've got you here. Now let's try to move the pin, and let's see if that range is comfortable. And I've done it with one client where she was barely moving to almost getting down to the upper arms being parallel to the body, so or perpendicular to the body. Sorry.
Yeah,
parallel.
Parallel. That's right.
Yeah.
Parallel to the floor. Anyway.
Yeah.
Or the upper arm's perpendicular to the floor. That's what you were saying.
Yeah, yeah. So you perpendicular to the floor and then parallel to the body. There we go.
I get them mixed up. So no, I can attest to that, because I've slowly reduced the gap. I call it gap, where you pin the weight stack for the movement arm for the chest press as my shoulders improved. So and I should credit Logan for that, because I was talking to Logan at Discover Strength, and he was saying that I should work up to a larger range of motion. Was his thinking. So that's kind of what I've been doing. Good stuff. All right. So I've got a list here of settings points that I just want to make sure we've covered. And I guess this maybe go without saying, but when you've got a new client on the machine for the first time, and you're trying to see if you've got their seat back and their bottom seat correct, is to put no weight on the actual movement arm and just let them do a couple reps to see what the range of motion looks like, right? To see if you've got
100%
that range parallel to the floor, or like how do I explain it? Like in line with the midline of their body, I suppose, so that that they're not too high or not too low in the seat. And again, I credit Logan for some of these tips.
Because the other thing I'll just add with that is that so I would always start them off light to get the range, but before they actually would start the movement, because I would keep it not necessarily to a super slow cadence in terms of the 10-10, but I wanted that slow transition on either end of the range of motion, right? So either on either turnaround. So my analogy has always been, because I found when it was too light, and this would go for any machine, but I found when it was too light, a lot of times the client would have a hard time neurologically controlling the speed of motion if there was really very little load. So let's say for somebody who is strong enough to do, let's say 200 pounds at a nice controlled cadence on the press, if I gave them 40, it's almost too late. They have a hard time getting that stop-start, right? So I would set the range of motion with a lightweight. Then I would move it up, let's say from 40 pounds to, let's say 120. And I already have in my head an idea of what the working weight is going to be going into that. And that was just practice and experience and having an idea of what their background was, et cetera. But so let's assume I start them with 40 and move it up to 120. And then I'll use the analogy when they go to start the movement that you're in a school zone and each end of the range of motion is a stop sign. So the police officers there watching, so all my clients drive, right? So they can make this visual, and we've got school zones all over the area. So it's an easy one to kind of relate to. But I would tell them that, okay, police officers watching, how do you leave the stop sign? And kids are crossing the street back and forth. So right away they'd be like, oh, I'd be, and they're going to come off slow. And I said, okay, so now you got to go to the next stop sign, which is still in that school zone. You can accelerate, but it has to be within reason getting to the next stop sign, because you don't want to slam on your brakes and scare kids. So it sounds ridiculous in terms of the explanation, but it just resonated with a lot of people. And so I would get them to get that feel for a couple of reps, and then we would go into the actual working set.
Yeah. It's so good if you get good at using analogy as a trainer, right? I'm just terrible at analogies. Like even on podcasts, when I've tried to use analogies, I either can't think of one or I completely screw one up trying to use one. So it's one of my things I'm working on, because I just realized that people, and myself included, I think Doug McGuff's great at this too, is using analogy to describe something complicated or alien, right? It's such a good way. So that was a great analogy. I love that. Something I was going to ask you about is lockout. So this seems to be another contentious one on the MedX chest press. Do you recommend clients lockout or stop short of lockout with this movement?
So I always stopped short, and this goes back to the converging arm issue, right? I found that if you can see this here, let me just pull this back.
This is why video is great, right? Because you can actually demo the way you do it.
Yeah. So I found, even though the movement arm it is pulling you back, I just found the lockout, there just wasn't enough resistance at the end, right? Like I just found I could really kind of lollygag, and, on a set, I mean, most of my clients were pretty good in terms of their form and not really pausing in any kind of advantageous point, right, to try to catch their breath or try to reduce the burn, so to speak. But I did find is that on the lockout, I could sit back a little bit and get that little second of, okay, and then go back into it. So I never wanted the lockout position. I always left a slight bend in the elbow. And the other thing I would generally do, with the exception of what I mentioned earlier in terms of squeezing into the yoga block for that hard stop, was I would set the seat, depending on the pinning of the stack, I would set the seat so that the hands didn't come all the way in towards the midline, so that even if they were to lock out, they would be closer to inline with the shoulder. Okay. So I never had it converge all the way through right to that point. I never liked it. And again, that's a personal opinion. I know some people love to come right in and get it like that and then bring it back.
And that's probably because they think there's more contraction of the chest, right, by locking out. And who cares if the tension falls off the triceps and the shoulders if the chest is the main target muscle, right? That's their thinking. Probably.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I think so. But again, sometimes it's a personal preference. I know some people love that. Like I said, some people love coming in like that. I preferred to keep the arms out away from the midline a little bit more. I know the pendulum press, I believe, is a straightforward, like no converging in towards the middle. So in that regard, I prefer that. So I would just set up the position accordingly.
Yeah, that's like, I remember talking to I can't remember the guy's name now. The chap we ended up at Denny's with at 3 a.m. Who from
Brian.
Brian, that's it. Brian Dawson.
Yep, Brian, yeah.
Brian, that's it. And he, I think I was just being a bit drunk and antagonizing and trying to say that his chest press wasn't as good as the MedX chest press. and then he said to me, no, it's not designed to be like that. It's designed to be more like a bench press. Hence why it comes straight as opposed to converging, right? Which
without asking him, my guess is that because pendulum sells a lot to football programs, right? Exactly. And every football program has a bench press testing, so it's a much more similar kind of path of motion, I guess. Yeah. And I think it was on your podcast that Michael Petrella mentioned that I think he trained somebody almost exclusively on the pendulum press to do the 225 bench press test.
Oh wow!
Yeah, maybe double check that, but I think that's
my podcast better than I do. I end up asking the same questions because I've done so many now. I think I forget what I've said, or what I've heard. But no, I think it'd be great to get Brian on the podcast at some point. I really like a lot of the pendulum machines, so that could be quite fun. All right, let's see here. We've talked much about the settings, actually. I'm just seeing if there's any gaps. Yeah. You mentioned about elbows in line with the spine. I remember hearing from some people that some people seem to notice that women potentially have more flexibility there, and the elbows can go maybe slightly further back behind the spine. I've noticed that too, but I don't really have the sample size to really comment too much on that.
So I would just say that I'll put it this way and say that just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So because somebody has the range of motion doesn't mean that range of motion is where they should be training. Fair. So I would still I mean, again, look at you can look at the torso thickness, look at the humeral length relative to the forearm. Don't use the tracking of the handles relative to the torso as a guide, right? Because that's akin to taking the barbell and saying you have to touch your chest. So you're not paying attention to what the shoulder mechanics are. You're paying attention to the actual tool, right? So it still goes back to what's going on in terms of the biomechanics of the body, and that's going to dictate either, in terms of the MedX, that'll dictate where the handle position is going to end up on the stretch, right? So for the women, I wouldn't treat it any differently. Like I would still stop them, in that position, like with again, you can go with a little bit of the stretch of the upper arm going behind the torso, right? So again, watching where the elbow is relative to the back. So the back of the rib cage is just the easiest way. Because if you start using, and I'll just point this out, somebody who's really skinny, it'll look visually different than somebody who's overweight, right? Because of the fat mass is going to hide sort of what you're looking at.
Yeah. Good point. And another thing on settings, maybe this is a given. Would you agree, hips back as far as possible into the seat so they're not kind of like at an angle, leaning back on the pad?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, because and that's the thing you have to watch too, is as they fatigue, is that leveraged position of that idea of trying to move the pelvis and move the hips forward to try to get more of a, it starts slipping down. And
and one last observation I'll say is just how, like, it seems to me that as you develop more experience, you can get better at eyeballing people in terms of their settings. And again, this is from conversations I've had with Logan about this particular piece. It's funny how you get some people who would just have the strangest proportions. So I have a client who is about 5'10", but his wingspan, I reckon, is probably about 6'2", maybe more. And on the MedX overhead press, he knocks off the roof of the weight stack.
Seriously?
Because his arms are so long. So he's shooting his arms up, and then the weight's going through. Maybe we've misconfigured the stack, and I need to talk about that with you separately. But if he has really long arms, and I actually had to take off the top of the stack because it was quite distracting, because every time he went up, it would knock it.
You would have to, I mean, without seeing him, I would say that your first step would be to just drop the seat. Yeah. Because that obviously right off the bat, and then you shouldn't have to pin the stack. Now, if the only thing is if you're dropping the seat, you don't have to pin the stack, so the stack is like flat all the way through without pinning, then he's just going to need to not have arms. Let's
talk about that offline. I mean, I am going to do a MedX overhead press episode at some point anyway. But yeah, to your point, the seat is slightly higher and it's gapped as well. So yeah, that is contributing to that. And but there's a reason for that. So let's park that and talk about that another time. But I use him as an example because on the MedX chest press, he's like a 6C and like a 2 or 3 back because his arms are so long. And it took me ages to kind of get it right for him. I'm still probably just off, but it's just a learning curve, isn't it? And having patience.
Well, like I said, like for me now, now again, I had mentioned the knee, the flexion with the knee. That's my guide, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be 100% all the time that everybody sets up in that position. Because to your point with the arm length, and I'm just thinking of actually my client Jean-Claude. I'm starting to think back, and I'm starting to think that he actually had because his back was at around 2. And I'm starting to think that his leg is
6'6", right?
Yeah. And I'm starting to think his leg didn't actually reach the knee flexion didn't go over. Like he actually kept his leg straddling, if memory serves. Wow. But either or, he was same thing. So he was down at around 2 or 3. His seat was low, maybe 6, if possible. And if I recall, I still had him pinned at around 5 holes, I think, somewhere around there. Yeah. But again, I'm going off memory, but it's just to say that you figure out the torso height first and foremost relative to the movement arm. like in terms of the position you want the handles at, right? In terms of his height. That's the first thing. Then you can just micro adjust around it. But I think you're better, because you mentioned like you want to get it done as quickly as possible. I think at the beginning, just if you take your time with it and you get it right the first time, it's probably better than trying to get it quickly so that you can, show proficiency. It's better to do it slowly and get it right bang on, so you don't have to readjust the next time out.
Yeah, totally right. Confession, I definitely change his settings like every single workout. For like the first 4 workouts, he's like, Lawrence, why are we changing it again? I'm like, just bear with me, John. We'll get there.
Yeah. But to your point, that comes to experience as well, playing with the machine. And that's the beauty. That's the one thing with MedX. I think that, outside of just the stroke length, which is amazing, but I think those micro adjustments are really what separates that equipment from a lot of the other manufacturers out there. Yeah. Especially selectorized.
Sure. So let's talk about coaching. So you've already gave some great points on this. You talked about how you asked the client to try and get their biceps to touch, which I think is really good. Can you talk a little bit more about pre-exercise instructions, or what you might say before the client actually starts working? What pointers you might give? You gave a great analogy about turnarounds. Is there anything else on the pre-exercise that you want to add?
Yeah. So, and I'll do that just to say that it probably should be done for every exercise, but specific to the MedX, the chest press. The first is just explaining to the client which muscles have to be working, right? So in terms of the MedX, so I always say the muscle that we're trying to target first and foremost is going to be the chest muscle, making sure that they know what the chest muscle is. And then following it through and saying, okay, you're also going to feel it in the shoulders. You're also going to feel it in the triceps. And after the work, so that's how we'll start it. And then I'll try to really have them constantly, like I said, biceps together, try to squeeze the chest, and which you'll find is a lot of people can't initially. They don't seem to get that squeeze properly. One of the reasons I loved the chest press and I wanted to talk about the chest press is because I naturally gravitate to, I can get a pretty broad back, a pretty thick back, and I can get a pretty thick chest. I can have skinny shoulders, so my delts don't seem to grow much, and my triceps will balloon, and my biceps will stay tiny. But I can feel my chest on anything I do. It doesn't matter what the exercise is. I just have great connection to it. So with the MedX, I loved it because I could set the positions right. There was everything, but a lot of my clients couldn't. So what we would have them do is I'd have them go through the set. I'd constantly remind them about the chest. This is only on the first time, by the way. I'd kind of stop talking once we got a few sessions in, and only point out if necessary. Sure. But when they were finished the set, and I always give, by the way, on the intros, I would always give about 45 minutes to an hour to make sure that we kind of got through everything and sort of I nailed all the key points that I wanted to, and that they understood it before they left. But in terms of that chest, when it was finished, I'd ask them where they felt it the most. Like, what did you feel? I'd get their feedback. If they were feeling it more, because I get a lot of people telling me they felt it shoulders and triceps, but not the chest. So what I would have them do is I have a couple of Swiss balls at the gym. So I have a 45 centimeter diameter ball. So it's pretty small. I would actually have them in different positions in terms of the rotation of the shoulder. So internal, external. And I would have them just squeeze into the ball for time, so like a time static, until they felt the chest contract, and then we'd actually go back to the MedX and I'd have them do it again. Usually with the same working weight and not to failure, just enough to get it, and usually that was enough to get them to feel the chest. Sorry, that was my daughter dropping an iPad in the background.
Oh God, hope it's okay.
We'll find out shortly if there's tears. But yeah, so that Swiss ball technique would get them enough to get them to squeeze, to feel the chest more, and then I could put them back on the MedX and have them sort of activate a little bit better. And sometimes with some clients, I would actually do that as a pre-exercise to the chest press if they were always having a hard time.
Yeah, and I guess the same can be achieved. I sometimes do a similar thing with yoga blocks, right, for chest bar.
Yeah. Well, you could even do the old Charles Atlas, like just squeeze your hands in towards one another. Right. I mean, anything works as long as they can get that connection. Sorry.
Yeah, 100%. Great points. I've got quite a few sessions booked this evening, so I'm excited to test some of this stuff out, Craig. What else would you be saying? Is there anything else you would add in terms of the pre-exercise, or would that be as much as you'd say before going into the
I
exercise?
think that was usually as much as I needed to say. I'd always make sure too, as they're going, is there any discomfort in the shoulders? Do you feel anything outside of what we described earlier, which would have been the triceps, the shoulders, and the chest? And for the most part, I never had anybody sit there and say that, I'm feeling it. And, I never had any neck issues. Occasionally, oh yeah, we could actually talk about that, because I know some people prefer the head on the pad. Other people prefer with the neck forward. I always told the clients, you just let your head go where your head goes. The only thing I would stress was, I don't want your head pressing hard into the pad. If you want to put it there, it's fine if you feel comfortable. But I would actually be very attentive on watching them if their head was on the pad, that they're not driving it back in as they fatigued. Because that's another point of leverage, right? So you start to struggle, you start to ratchet, then you start to brace backwards with everything. So neck included. So sometimes I would actually just roll a towel, place it just underneath the occiput on the back of the skull there, and then just have their head come a little bit forward.
Got it. Okay. So what about instruction during the actual exercise? What sort of corrective or positive specific feedback are you giving throughout the actual exercise?
So I never, this goes back to like watching my daughter's soccer and stuff like that. So I never really criticized anything while they were doing it, unless it was something glaring that I knew, shit, if they don't change this, the potential for injury might be there. So I would really just focus on the positives. In terms of any commentary I would have, it would be, say, great, your breathing, something could be something simple like, your breathing's amazing, just keep it going like that. Fantastic turnarounds. Your cadence is great. Anything that I felt like they were doing well is what I would point out. And then anything that I noticed that needed correction that I think would have made things better, I would wait, tell them at the end, make a note of it, and then the next session, before they started the exercise, I would address that then. So I never really did it just because I felt like there was just always too much information going through. Because I talk a lot as it is, and so I just felt like the more I wanted to give them, the more confused they might get. So I tried to keep it very, very simple. And then, like I said, any glaring issue, the next session prior to the exercise, we would bring it up, and then they'd start on that foot.
Yeah, I'm really starting to understand better how this part of the personal training is very much like, well, I don't want to say it's nature nurture, but it is. It does seem to be, again, I'm not going to say you either have it or you don't. I think you can learn it. But I think it's very, very complicated, and it takes for someone to really do a good job at the actual instruction during the exercise. It just takes a lot of practice, right? And one thing I've noticed is I love what you said there about highlighting the positives so that they continue to do the things they're doing well throughout the entire set, especially as they start to really reach a deep level of fatigue. What I've noticed for myself with the corrective feedback, and again, I should thank the guys at Discover Strength for learning how to do this from them, really, for the most part, is what I do. So let's say someone does, using the MedX chest press as an example, let's say they're coming out at the end of the positive and they're coming quite far forward with their shoulders. They're not keeping, and their shoulders are elevated, right? So shoulders should be back and neutral, right? If I see them doing that, rather than say, don't do that in that moment, I'll wait till they've come right back on the negative. And then just as they turn around, they're about to go into that positive, I say, okay, now I want you to keep your shoulders down and back when you go into this positive. Mm-hmm. And I find timing it like that is far more appropriate. I find that to be more productive. So when I give my corrective feedback, I tend to wait until they're about to do it again and then do it. And then they listen. Well, and again, this differs between clients, right? So you have to understand that you're dealing with an individual and all of this has to be tailored. But I've just found that a couple of clients I work with, that seems to be the way to do it.
Yeah, you're 100% on. And just, I had a couple of clients that I really didn't say anything during the set because they didn't want me to. They didn't want me keeping count. They didn't want me, they're just like, shut up and let me do it. And then we'll talk after. and they would, you could see them getting upset if I opened my mouth during the set. Like it was, and I'd get people like, I know, they'd be shouting back at you. So yeah, to your point, it needs to be tailored to the person. So and just going back to rec last year, so 2019, that was the one thing I loved, going station to station with all the trainers from DS, was the commonality. You can tell, I mean, they all went through the same training, obviously, but the way they were able to give that positive feedback during the set. And it was subtle. Like, it doesn't, it's not blowing smoke up your ass kind of stuff. It was just like, hey, you did that really well. They acknowledge it. Because you're sitting there, you're struggling, you're cursing. I mean, you did the workout. We're all sitting there trying to show off in front of one another. And I remember in my head, like, if I could get off this machine, I'd smack you, appreciating the moment and all, but also recognizing as they're giving you the feedback, you're like, yeah, I am doing this really well, which was great. So yeah, in terms of the client, you have that foundation of what you're going to cue and what you're not, and then you also have to understand that the individual, certain people are not going to respond in the moment the way that somebody else will, and that has to be tailored to them 100%.
Yeah. I give a good example. I train my fiance Ashling, who I don't think you've met yet, because you didn't come to you didn't come to Rec 2018, did you? So hopefully you get to meet in the future. But I've been training her, and she is like completely different to any of my other people I train. And I've been training her for years now, when we haven't had a studio to train at. And she hates it when I use the word awesome, because apparently only a beautiful sunset is awesome. A turnaround on a seated row is not awesome, right? So she hates it when I say that. She hates it when I try and motivate her to like complete a rep. All I'm allowed to do is pretty much be silent throughout the entire set, except give her corrective feedback. The occasional count, let's say she's at failure and I wanted to inroad for like 5 or 10 seconds, the occasional count at the static, right? What else is there? Oh yeah, just positive reinforcement of things she's doing well. But then she just hates anything that's like motivational, or because the other guys I work with, I'm like, come on, it drives some of them, right? I have a guy who I train virtually who loves it when I'm like really harsh with him, So like at the end of a set, he was struggling. I said, be honest with yourself, because he was actually failing long before fatigue. And then he did another rep. And then at the end of the set, he said, I loved that. That was really helpful. So it's interesting, isn't it? How different people respond to different things. And, Ashling and this client of mine, Tolu, they're like other ends of the spectrum, right?
That could also be because my wife is very similar. I don't train her anymore, but when I was training her, she, again, didn't want me talking, unless it was something really like, let's just change this little thing. Don't count. I don't want the numbers. And yeah, and the same thing, like I had to use either great job, well done. That was the terminology. Forget fantastic, awesome, nothing along those lines. But I don't know if, and anybody else listening that trains their spouse, I'm not sure if that's because, there are respective others, or if that's their personality. Like when you were doing your free virtuals, and you would put me through one, I actually had suggested to my wife, I said, he's giving out free ones. You should try it and see what you think. Because I have a sneaking suspicion, A, she would have worked harder for you, and B, she would have been a lot more receptive to your feedback versus my feedback. Yeah. And that's partially why I wanted her to do it. I wanted to see the difference. I mean, ultimately, obviously, she didn't. But anyways, to say that, yeah, it's just people can be really, really different. The other thing I was going to add with the feedback, and we hadn't talked about set extenders at all.
Yeah, we'll get
but yeah, so that's also another way of looking at the individual in terms of how you're going to approach. Like I've had some clients where I don't tell them what I'm going to do ahead of time, because if I tell them, they're gonna sandbag the initial portion of the set getting to the extender. So they're going to mentally kind of shut themselves down before they're really at failure, before I go to the extender in, right? And I can see it. I have other clients that they want to know from A to Z what's going to happen all the way through. Like they don't want any surprises. They need to know every small detail. And those are the ones that have to be very, they want to know, like if I tell them, okay, you should be feeling X now, they want that. Like they want to know, like, okay, what I'm feeling, this is normal. This is the way it should be. I have others that I don't say that stuff to, because if they're not feeling something, then they feel like they're doing something wrong. Well, I'm not feeling that. What's wrong with the way I'm doing it? Even though everything's perfect, I just might have jumped the gun telling them that, and then I've actually created a distracted set because of it. So that comes with practice, that comes with time, and that comes with just kind of knowing the client over multiple sessions.
Yeah, people are fascinating, just how different we are. And I think you're totally right. I think I might have conflated the spouse dynamic, the relationship dynamic with the individual. So I think it'd be interesting to hear from our colleagues actually whether they have the same issue with their partner when training them.
Yeah, 100%.
That could be interesting. So, okay, just going back to instruction during the exercise. So, coaching the shoulders down. You said you prefer them not to lock out the elbows. So I guess again, I'm making some assumptions here, Craig, but smooth turnarounds and just no momentum, keeping tension on the muscle, controlled slow movement through the middle.
Breathing like they're having a conversation.
Okay.
Until I want them to try to do that blow off the CO2 kind of approach, but I always, again, leading up to the set and over time, right? I mean, we're talking specifically about the chest press, but any of the exercises that you're doing, certain cues in terms of the breathing, in terms of you're effectively going to be repeating the same thing over and over. So with a new client, if I was starting them on the chest press, I would go through the breathing cue. I just want you to stay relaxed in your breathing. Don't hold your breath at any point. I want you to kind of breathe as if you were carrying on a conversation. As you reach fatigue, you're going to increase your heart rate. You're going to breathe a little faster. That's all part of the experience, but maintain a relaxed shoulder complex. So I want your shoulders down. Always think of the shoulders down towards the floor as opposed to up to the ears. So shoulders away from the ears, down to the floor. And then I would also instruct them and say that is going to go for every other exercise that we're going to do today. So I would remind them again, but I don't need to necessarily go over the same points for the breathing on, let's say going from the chest press to the pull down to the row to the shoulders to the leg press or whatever. Once I've done it once, then it's a quick reminder. I don't necessarily need to repeat unless they're having a really hard time with it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's actually super valuable. Okay, so should we move over to, I wanted to go to protocols and then we can go to advanced overload techniques or set extenders, right?
For sure.
So in terms of protocols, I've got a few here. You can do obviously different cadences, 10-10, 2-4, 4-4, slow negatives if you've got the full range. So you can do 30-30-30, which I think is probably a Ellington Darden inspired protocol.
I think that was the X-Force protocol, if I recall.
Okay. What protocols do you use on this?
So I would stick more to, initially I would always start with a 10-10, just because I wanted to teach them the control on either end, right? Not necessarily strict, but that was sort of the guideline. And what I found was if the turns were well done, they almost always fell into an 8 to 10 second concentric, 8 to 10 second eccentric without me necessarily pointing out the time frames. And I would usually do that. I kept most of the protocols going for a good 6 weeks, up to maybe 12 weeks, depending on what I saw for progress from the client, right? So I don't necessarily, I know some people are like, you should be changing the program every 6 weeks, you should be doing this. If I was seeing progress, I just let it go. As long as they weren't complaining about boredom and I didn't feel like they were not getting complacent, but that they weren't complaining about anything, right? Because I have some clients, I'm sure you're going to see this, that are coming more from a bigger volume approach, that like, to a certain degree, like being in the gym, but for whatever reason, time constraints, whatever, somebody they know has, read Body by Science, and they've gone on to the website, and lo and behold, you've got clients coming in, and so they're new to it, and they're still under the mindset that I should be doing quote unquote the Weeder slash Beachbody muscle confusion technique, right? So with some clients, I would change it earlier, but for the most part, if I see the progress is going up week to week, I see that everything's good, I would prefer to just keep the program the way it is without changing, unless the client's goals change. And that's, slightly off topic, but if their goals change, I might change the way I'm doing things. But for the most part, 6 to 12 weeks, somewhere in there. Then I'm going to loosen up with the tempo in terms of I don't necessarily need the 8 seconds in between. I've done 4-2s. Usually if I do like the standard 2-second concentric, 4-second Nautilus, eccentric, I will put on the eccentric with the plates just gently touching, so you're not unloading the muscle. I'll put a 2-second pause. So they're actually going to hold before coming back up. And then I want on the concentric, the turnaround back to eccentric, I want that smooth. I don't want any pause at the top. So those protocols, depending on the client, would always go between 45 seconds to 1:15. I generally wouldn't go longer than that, because I found that the hold on the eccentric it wasted them a lot quicker. Yeah. So that would be the first one. The second one I would do would be the J reps. Okay, so the Brian Johnson stuff. Those would be the big 3 that I would kind of go with.
So I love the idea of having a pause in the bottom. Something I used to do when I used to train on this machine at Kiso years ago, but I've not been doing with clients now, and I don't quite know why, because a lot of them do like to jerk out of the bottom, especially when they're fatigued, to cheat and get momentum, and I have to constantly tell them to slow down and smoothly turn around. But actually, by building in a pause, you might mitigate that completely.
Well, because now the only thing to watch with that is with the pause at the bottom is the shift forward, taking the torso off the bench, right? So you'll see that sort of kind of protraction of the shoulder blades, shoulders are rounding forward to try to create that push out. Now, so what I would do with some clients, not all of them, but with some of them, if I knew that was going to come, I would tell them going into the stretch, so they're coming through the eccentric, I'll tell them, okay, I'm going to help you up on the next one. So go for you're going to pause, I'll help you. So they're more likely to hold the position, and then I'll just give them that little bit of an assist just to get them going if they need. And now in COVID times, you can't really stand in front of the client like that, but.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? There's lots of, touching and in assisted reps and things like that our colleagues would have done pre-COVID, and now it's trying to find more creative ways to help do assisted reps without, I guess some people might not be comfortable getting anywhere near the client, but I think it's difficult to really provide a great workout and do assisted reps and things like that if you're not kind of in their space, Well,
100%. And I think, so one of the things I would do, and I will stress this, especially with the chest, with the activation stuff we were talking about earlier, I would normally poke them on their chest. Like I'd be like, that's where I want you to focus. And that would work a lot. Just as a side, if it was a female client, I would ask them ahead of time and say, look, I'm just going to poke you here. I'd do it on myself first. Are you okay with that? If need be during the set. I'm not going to ask them during the set, because I want them focusing on the task at hand, not me going, hey, do you mind if I,
that's hilarious.
So, but now it's, I do have some clients that are very, that are coming in, because we're one-on-one, so I'm actually able to stay open and take clients. But some of the ones that are coming are very paranoid, so I can't get in their space to do some of that stuff. So you kind of have to do workarounds. But so back to that MedX chest press. So that would be one of the things, is just pulling on the movement arm with them to get them out of that pause. And then they can go in again. So, and that just eliminates the idea of them, kind of trying to cheat to get it out of the hole on the last 1 or 2 reps.
Yeah, great idea. I think that's really useful. So just to elaborate on the J reps. So when you say that, I'm guessing you're talking about doing repetitions in the shorter range at the beginning, maybe repetitions at the end range, or then something in the middle. Like, can you elaborate on what that might look like?
So so I would always do. I preferred the weaker ranges first, then into the mid range, then into the top range, and then whatever's left, we'll just go for full range. So knowing what the pins were ahead of time in terms of the stack would make it a lot easier to then go, okay, here's how we're going to do this. And the way I did it was I wouldn't go to failure in each range. So based on the load, I would have a kind of a generalized idea of how many reps in these partial areas they would get, right? And then I would go, okay, you're going to aim for, let's say, 12 controlled repetitions here. And I want to see somewhere around 20 to 30, 35 seconds per range. That was kind of what I'd go for. Again, general, because it depended on the client. I had some clients whose fast twitch fibers were almost non-existent, but their sets could go 3 or 4 minutes. But if I raised the 2-pound plate, which was an extreme, like a really extreme case, but if I raised her 2 pounds, she could go from 3 minutes, and this is on the chest press specifically, she could go from 3 minutes to a minute on that 2-pound increase. Like it was crazy. Yeah, like there was just no. Anyways, so it would depend on the client. So what I would do is, I would set the pinning. I knew ahead of time what the pin situation was going to be, so I would test it first. So we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to go here. So I had those 3 positions set up ahead of time. So the bottom range, I'd predetermine where I wanted them to stop in terms of the humerus. So I would watch the tracking of the humerus elbow. So I would come off. Usually, I think it would end up being somewhere on a 4 inch, maybe 4 inches in terms of the movement. So not that great a degree. We go to failure there. The weight would come down. Actually, I'd have them go up. Sorry, it's been a while. The weight would come down. I would repin right away. They'd go to the next range up, and then I'd pin the final time at the top end. So then they would be hitting like just there, right? So literally, they'd almost be going from just before lockout to a very, very little stretch. Then repin to the original setting, and they would go for 1 or 2 full range reps, super slow.
Yeah.
And that would usually, like I said, it would take anywhere from 20 seconds per range, 30 seconds per range. The set would usually be done within the 90-second timeline.
Got it. And for everyone listening, I really encourage you to actually go to YouTube, or this video will be posted across platforms, YouTube, Facebook. It will also be on the website highintensitybusiness.com. It will be embedded probably via YouTube on the actual blog post. And I encourage you to watch the video, because throughout this entire thing, Craig is constantly demoing the movements with his arms. It's very useful. Craig, let's just conscious of time, let's wrap up with some overload techniques, set extenders. So tell me about what you do at failure with clients.
Okay, so I basically would always do, for the first time, if they're new to the sort of the high intensity stuff and they hadn't been with me that long, I always loved the negatives. That was kind of my fun thing. Now, I wouldn't do the overload where I would have them, let's say, do the working set at, let's say, 200 pounds. I wouldn't then go to like 240 and do the negative. I would take them through the set, let them hit failure, and then I would be pulling on the movement arm, bring it up, and then we would work on a 30-second negative, which would usually give them 1 or 2 reps. Most often it was 1, and most often it never got to the 30 seconds. So we would do that first. The second thing I would do, depending on, is pull them, allow them to get to 90 degrees elbow flexion, and then you're going to hold for time. Once I saw that the times were depending, because if it looked like they were at failure, and then I brought them into that position, I would know pretty well that, okay, they had a lot more gas in the tank than they let on, or they thought they had, and I misread it. So what I would have them do is, instead of just doing the static hold for time, because I could see it going up, right? So if they had more gas in the tank, I wanted it done in around 10 to 15 seconds. But if I saw it was going there and they weren't really moving, I'd say, okay, I want you to push back out against the load. So don't just hold it in place. I want you to try to move it back forward. You'd see that fatigue level come in a lot quicker. And then as it starts to overtake them, now I want you to move it back as slowly as possible. So you'd start to, so again, this would only apply if I misread or they misread the set. And that extender, that hold position was going longer than the 10 seconds, and it looked like it was going to continue way longer than it should have. So I would have them try to push back up. Usually, and what I would see was they wouldn't get it very far, and then it would start actually overtaking them, and then they would start moving back, and then we would count that down, like I said, on let's say a 10 to 20 second or whatever it was, as slowly as they could. So that would be that was always my go-to. The last one would be take the set to failure and then just repin, almost like a J rep, where I would bring it back up. I would pin it, do as many as you can, pin it, do as many as you can, pin it, do as many as you can, and we would actually just drop the movement arm down. So that was the other one, and then finally would just be a simple drop set.
Okay.
So if you hit to failure, I would drop it usually by 2 plates, so about 40 pounds. Again, depending on the client, and it would take 1 or 2 sessions to figure out what was ideal for them in terms of the drop, because some clients hit failure and they were going well and beyond like 50% load, which was a cool thing to watch. So somebody who was hitting like my 6'5" guy, I think he was at 390 or 400 on the mat. Yeah, he was a beast, but I had to bring it down well below, like when he hit failure, and he was like a 60-second time under tension max guy. Like anything beyond that was a waste. But if I kept him around the 60-second time frame, we would just go up weekly. It was kind of neat to watch. But on a drop set, if I dropped it like 40 pounds, he's not moving the stack. If I drop it 60 pounds, not moving the stack. 80 pounds, not, like we had to drop it at least 50% for him to be able to get another 2 reps out. Yeah. So, like I said, that just comes with knowing the client and a little bit of trial and error. But I always did, and I would do 3 drops. So from the original working weight, if I could, I would go 3 drops down, and I would never combine that on another exercise. So if I was doing, like, let's say the MedX 6 that you have, I would pick one exercise for the week. So we'll use the chest press as the example, and that would be the set extender set.
All right. So you wouldn't do advanced techniques on everything.
No, because I found for a lot of people it would just beat the shit out of them. Honestly, like I just found that for a lot of them it was just too much. If they were younger and they didn't have any responsibilities in terms of mortgage payments, kids, and stuff like that, and they were sleeping, and I found they could recover. And yeah, but yeah, I can't do that kind of, like, just talking for me personally for a second, like I can't do those kind of things on multiple exercises. I can do it on one and then I'm shot. So I had a bit of a bias when I would approach it with clients, but also, again, looking at the charts, looking to see where the progress was, and just getting the feedback on how they would feel week to week or session to session. And then just kind of playing with that as we went. But as a general rule, it was always just one extender on one exercise only per week, and I would alternate that week to week. Yeah. Unless it was a lagging, like something that they really wanted to see move up, and that would be the focal point first exercise of the workout, and that would be the one there where we would really put all the emphasis on.
This is interesting because there's 2 guys I'm working with at the moment, and they're just improving in strength, or at least in their performance week on week, session on session. They're both trained twice a week. Now I have them do some kind of advanced technique after almost every exercise. It's usually not, might not always be like 3 negatives. It might just be like, partials on the leg press for like a rep count, right? Like 10 extra reps or something. Now, I think that's different though for you and I, because you and I are going to probably train much harder in that initial set. And so an advanced technique is going to be that much worse. Whereas these guys, there'll be the odd exercise, but they don't go to muscle failure. In fact, it's quite common. There might be like 1 or 2 reps shy. And so I use the advanced technique to just really keep them honest. And I think if they were actually able to go to muscle failure in the first set, which they probably will do in time, then there'll be less utility with the advanced technique, especially as they probably need more recovery as they get stronger, potentially, because they'll be doing more damage, right? So I think it's just playing it by ear with that. It's been my experience.
Well, I think you're actually bang on with that explanation. I mean, I think you said that perfectly. For somebody who is not necessarily giving a true 100%, and there are tons of clients like that, right? You're going to encounter a lot of people. That's a great way of ensuring that they're getting the full bang for their buck. And then again, you look at it in terms of how because one of the things that I've seen with some of my clients is they don't actually ever want to get to that, if that makes sense. Like they like the brevity of the sessions, brief and infrequent, etc., but they don't necessarily like feeling that sort of robot, right? I think back to that the Renex video of Dr. McGuff lying on the floor. And even I looked at that. I was like, "That's really cool, but Jesus, no, no, thank you. I don't want that ever." And it's not because I'm soft. It's just I've got to be able to function the next day. And I have some clients that have really expressed concern that their 2 or 3 days of feeling like shit, where they feel tired or they feel sluggish, and that's not because the workout itself, that stimulus was too much. It's just that stimulus is too much in conjunction with everything else they've got going on with their lives, right? So I think it just depends. Like, I think with the clients that you've got, if they're seeing the progress and you're doing all those extenders with them and week to week it's going up and they're happy, then I would not change a thing. I would keep doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's early days and a small sample size, and I always check in with them and they always feel rested and they feel good and ready to go. So they could just be total outliers. I know one of them has quite impressive genetic heritage. I think his grandparents were like Olympians or something, but then he's not actually been looking after himself until now. And so now it's kind of fascinating because he's almost expressing what his potential could be. Craig, just conscious of time, what's the best way for people to find out more about you?
Okay, so currently, a little ghost ran by in the corner. So right now you can, I changed the Instagram page, so you can actually go see that at Altered Canada. So ALTERED Canada. The website for the time being is still going to be gethit.ca. So you can email me at craig@gethit.ca. I have a couple of domain names that I've taken. I'm just deciding which one is actually going to be the website. So hopefully by the time this goes live, I'll have selected that and you can maybe put that in the show notes with the new email. But for in the meantime, just go craig@gethit.ca. And you know what? I'll even throw out the phone number here if you want to get in touch with me at 514-659-1852.
Thank you for being so open to connect with people, Craig. This has been great. I think this has been really quite comprehensive overview of how to use the MedX chest press, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time, mate, to come on the show today and talk about it.
Well, listen, man, thank you very much for having me, and I certainly wish you all the best with the studio. I know you guys are going to kill it. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the future posts and pics and all the progress reports that go with that. So all the best to you both. And just for those of you, another real quick plug and for the business membership. But once a month, we all get together for a virtual happy hour. So you get trainers from all over that get to talk about their experiences. You get to sit back. We have a relaxed conversation about all things fitness, training, and life. And it's especially during COVID, it's really been an amazing way of keeping in touch with everybody. So again, another benefit of that business membership.
Yeah, and are you coming on tonight for that?
Yeah, of course.
Good man.
Yeah, that's it's in the calendar, so my wife rolls her eyes.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. Actually, that would be a nice, relaxing happy hour following what is a very, very busy day. I've got sessions back to back after these calls today. But I actually totally forgot about that during this conversation with you. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, no, looking forward to that. So that's something we do every month to obviously connect with our colleagues. And I want to credit Luke for coming up with that idea because he actually suggested it to me months back. And I thought, yeah, that's a really great idea, especially during, COVID, helping everyone connect and not because we're not able to get together for rec and things like that yet. So no, thank you for promoting that too. And for everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode and download a PDF giving you 10 ways to get more clients for your high intensity training business, please go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 299. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.